The dawn painted the prairie in rust and copper, while the north wind whipped red dust through the sparse settlement of Abalone Gulch. A handful of weathered wooden buildings, a saloon, a church, and the Hart Forge with its thick black smoke rising like a defiant flag against the pale sky. Eliza Hart worked the bellows with blistered hands, her muscles straining as she hammered horseshoes for a wagon train preparing to push west. The rhythmic clang of metal on metal echoed through the morning air, each strike a testament to skill that few believed a woman could possess. The men waiting for their horses muttered among themselves, shooting skeptical glances her way. "What does a woman know about steel?" one grumbled, loud enough for her to hear. She didn't pause in her work, merely adjusted her leather apron and brought the hammer down with practiced precision. The shoe took shape beneath her hands, glowing orange-hot against the anvil. Her father had taught her to let the work speak louder than words ever could. Caleb Hart sat hunched on a stool near the forge's warmth, his chest rattling with each labored breath. The lung sickness had taken hold 2 winters past, stealing the strength from his arms but not the knowledge from his mind. Between coughing fits that left specks of blood on his handkerchief, he offered guidance in his gravelly voice. "Easy there, Liza. Steel only behaves when you show it patience, not just power." "Yes, Papa," she replied, though patience had never come naturally to her. The desert had a way of burning it out of people, leaving only stubbornness and grit. Word had been spreading through town like wildfire about the massive cattle drive heading their way. Gideon Vale's outfit. They said thousands of head that would need water, feed, and repairs before pushing onto the rail yards up north. The drought had stretched on for 3 months now, turning the wells brackish and the creek beds to cracked clay. Water speculators had been circling like buzzards, buying up rights and charging desperate folks triple for what should be free as air. Sheriff Silas Pritchard chose that moment to swagger through the forge's open doors, his badge tarnished and his breath already sour with whiskey, though the sun had barely cleared the horizon. His gut strained against his vest, and his small eyes swept over Eliza with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Morning, Miss Hart," he drawled, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. "Thought I'd stop by and discuss a matter of protection." Eliza didn't look up from her work. "We pay our taxes, Sheriff. That should buy all the protection we need." Now. Pritchard moved closer, his boots scraping against the dirt floor. "A young woman running a business alone, well, almost alone." He glanced dismissively at Caleb. "Attracts certain unsavory attention. Wouldn't want any accidents to happen. Fire spreads awful quick in a forge." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Eliza finally raised her eyes, meeting his gaze steadily. "Are you suggesting we need protection from you, Sheriff?" His face darkened. "You got a sharp tongue. Girl, your daddy should have taught you better manners along with that man's work. There's debts on this property, back taxes that certain interested parties might be willing to overlook if you were more accommodating." Before Eliza could respond, the thunder of hooves on the main street drew everyone's attention. Through the doorway, they could see a line of riders approaching a dozen men on fine horses, their clothes dusty but well-made, silver conchos glinting on their saddles. At their head rode a man who sat his mount like he'd been born to it, broad-shouldered and easy in his movements despite the long trail. Gideon Vale swung down from his bay stallion with the fluid grace of a natural horseman. He was younger than Eliza had expected from the stories, perhaps 30. With sun-weathered features and eyes the color of winter sage. His spurs rang against the wooden sidewalk as he approached the forge, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. "Miss Hart," his voice carried a slight Texas drawl, polite but not subservient. "I'm Gideon Vale. I sent word ahead about some work we'd need done." Eliza wiped her hands on her apron, acutely aware of the soot under her nails and the sweat-dampened tendrils of hair escaping her braid. "Mr. Vale, what kind of work are we talking about?" He produced a list from his vest pocket, written in neat script. Replacement parts for chuck wagons, hooks, pins, wheel rims, new shoes for 40 head of horses. Branding irons need repair, and I'd like to commission some specialty tools for the water project I'm planning. He paused, studying her with those sage green eyes. I need it done quick, but done right. I'll pay fair wages for fair work. Sheriff Pritchard inserted himself between them, puffing up like a bantam rooster. Mr. Vale, you might want to reconsider. The Heart Forge has been having some difficulties. Might not be reliable enough for such a substantial order. Gideon's gaze shifted to the sheriff, and something cold flickered in his expression. I prefer to judge reliability for myself. Sheriff, he looked back at Eliza. Can you handle the work, Miss Hart? Pride stiffened her spine. I can handle anything you need. Mr. Vale, when do you need it by? 2 weeks. We're setting up the water wheel system before the summer heat gets worse. He named a price that made Pritchard's eyes widen with greed, and Caleb straighten on his stool. That's acceptable, Eliza said, fighting to keep her voice steady. That money would cover her father's medicine for months, maybe even bring a doctor from Fort Worth. Don't say I didn't warn you, Pritchard muttered, shouldering past them. At the door, he turned back. You remember what we discussed. Miss Hart wouldn't want you making promises you can't keep. After the sheriff left, Gideon's expression remained neutral, but Eliza caught the slight tightening around his mouth. Is he going to be a problem? Nothing I can't handle, she said quickly, too quickly. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I'll send my foreman, Ramon, with the first load of materials tomorrow. If you need anything supplies, extra hands you let him know. We manage fine on our own, Eliza said, the words automatic as breathing. Accepting help meant owing favors, and favors had a way of becoming chains. Gideon replaced his hat, touching the brim in farewell. I don't doubt it. Miss Hart, good day to you. Mr. Hart. He nodded respectfully to her father before heading back to his men. At the saloon, the town gossips were already spinning tales. That rich cowboy will own this whole town before summer's end, predicted Josiah Mills. The dry goods proprietor, mark my words. And the Hart girl thinks she can fill an order that size. Someone laughed. She'll be begging him for extensions within a week, and we all know what kind of payment men like that expect from a desperate woman. But at the forge, Eliza was already calculating how much iron she had on hand, how many hours of daylight, how to stretch their dwindling coal supply. The desert wind howled through the gaps in the walls, carrying the scent of distant rain that never seemed to fall. She pumped the bellows harder, watching the coals flare white-hot. He's not like the others, Caleb said softly, his words punctuated by a cough. They're all like the others. Papa, they just wear different masks. Eliza brought the hammer down, shaping the glowing metal with controlled fury. Each strike rang out her determination she would fill this order, pay their debts, and keep their independence. She had to, as night crept across the desert, bringing a chill that bit through the forge's warmth. Eliza finally banked the coals and helped her father to their small room behind the shop. Through the window, she could see campfires dotting the edge of town where Vale's outfit had settled. The wind carried snatches of Mexican songs and the lowing of cattle, sounds that promised change whether she wanted it or not. She pulled out their ledger, squinting in the lamplight as she figured and refigured. If she worked 18-hour days, if the coal lasted, if her father's health held, if Pritchard didn't make good on his threats. Too many ifs. But she'd faced worse odds. The frontier didn't coddle those who waited for certainty. In the distance, a coyote howled, and others took up the cry until the night rang with their wild chorus. Eliza closed the ledger and prepared for bed, her hands already aching for tomorrow's labor. Through it all, one thought persisted like a coal that wouldn't cool the way Gideon Vale had looked at her, not like she was a woman out of place or a curiosity to be conquered, but like she was exactly what she claimed to be, a blacksmith with work to do. It was unsettling, it was dangerous, and despite her better judgment, some small part of her wanted to see that look again. The main creek that fed Abalone Gulch had dwindled to a muddy trickle, and even that was now blocked by a rough fence of barbed wire and posted signs. Water rights property of Lyle Banking Company, the notices declared, with Sheriff Pritchard's seal stamped below. The speculators had moved fast, acquiring legal claims to the headwaters through papers that smelled of whiskey and midnight dealings. Eliza discovered this at dawn when she drove her wagon to fill the barrels needed for the forge. The armed guards lounging by the fence straightened when they saw her, hands drifting to their gun belts. "That's far enough, miss," one called out, tobacco juice staining his beard. "This here's private property now. You want water, you negotiate with Mr. Lyle at the bank." "Since when?" Eliza kept her voice level, though rage simmered in her chest. "This creek's been public use since the town was founded." "Since last Tuesday, when the proper claims were filed." The guard grinned, showing brown teeth. "Course, I heard Mr. Lyle might be willing to work out special arrangements for a pretty thing like you." Eliza's hands tightened on the reins until her knuckles went white. Without water, she couldn't temper steel properly. Without steel, she couldn't fill Vale's order. The trap was as neat as a snare around a rabbit's neck. "There a problem here?" Gideon Vale appeared on horseback, having approached quiet as a shadow. He sat easy in the saddle, but Eliza noticed his hand rested casual-like near his holster. The guards shifted uneasily. Everyone knew Vale's reputation fair but not soft. The kind of man who'd faced down rustlers and claimed jumpers from Texas to Colorado. "No problem. Mr. Vale," the first guard said quickly. "Just explaining the new water situation to the lady." Gideon's eyes swept over the fence, the signs, the guns. "That's so," he turned to Eliza. "Miss Hart, I've got full water barrels at camp. You're welcome to what you need for your work." Pride and necessity warred in her chest. "I don't take charity, Mr. Vale." "Not charity. Call it protecting my investment. Can't have my horseshoes forged with bad water." His tone was mild, but he held her gaze steady. And she read the message there, asterisk. "Take the help. Fight this battle another day." "I'll repay you," she said stiffly. "I know you will." They were 3 miles out of town, Eliza's wagon loaded with Vale's water barrels. When the dust storm hit, it came roaring out of the north like a living thing, a wall of red-brown darkness that swallowed the sun. The horses screamed, white showing around their eyes as the wind hit like a physical blow. Eliza grabbed for the brake as the wagon lurched sideways, wheels catching in a rut. The world disappeared into a howling chaos of dust and wind that scoured exposed skin raw. She couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond holding the traces as the horses fought to bolt. Then strong hands were pulling her from the wagon seat. Gideon materialized out of the storm like something from a fever dream, his duster whipping around them both as he dragged her against his chest. He pressed her face into his shirt, one arm iron hard around her while the other fought to control his own mount. "The horses!" she tried to shout, but the wind stole her words. "Let them run." His voice was right by her ear, the only warm thing in a world gone cold and violent. "Hold on to me." She had no choice. The storm was trying to tear her away, and only his strength kept her anchored. He smelled of leather and horse and clean sweat, solid and real while everything else dissolved into chaos. His heart hammered against her cheek as he pulled his duster around them both, creating a small pocket of shelter. Time stretched strange in the howling darkness. Could have been minutes or hours that she stood pressed against him, feeling the flex of muscle as he fought to keep them both upright against the wind. His hand splayed across her back, holding her secure, and she found herself gripping his shirt like a lifeline. The thought came unbidden. Dangerous as lightning asterisk, the blacksmith's daughter resisted temptation until the rich cowboy pulled her close. It would be so easy to stay here, to let someone else be strong for once, to stop fighting and just rest. The realization hit her like cold water. She shoved back against his chest, struggling to put distance between them even as the wind tried to knock her down. "I can stand on my own," she gasped out, though her legs shook with the effort. He let her go immediately, but stayed close enough to catch her if she fell. Through the settling dust, she could see his face concerned but not patronizing, respectful of her need to stand alone even in the aftermath of crisis. "You all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Her whole body trembled from cold, from fear, from something else she didn't want to name. The storm passed as quickly as it had come, leaving them standing in a world transformed. Red dust coated everything like dried blood. Her horses had run themselves out a quarter-mile away. The wagon tilted but unbroken. "Thank you," she managed, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "I'll repay this debt too." Something flickered in his eyes' frustration, maybe, or disappointment. "Not everything's a debt, Miss Hart. Sometimes folks just help each other because it's right." "In my experience, Mr. Vale, everything has a price. I prefer to pay mine up front." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "As you wish." He helped her catch the horses and right the wagon, working in companionable silence. But as he mounted up to leave, he turned back. "You know, my mother was a lot like you. Wouldn't take help from anybody, not even when she was sick and we barely had food. She died proud and independent." His voice held no judgment, just quiet sorrow. "I was 12. Always wondered if she'd have lived longer if she'd let people care about her." He touched his hat and rode off before she could respond, leaving her standing in the settling dust with his words echoing harder than the storm. Back at the forge, the scene was controlled chaos. Caleb had collapsed during the storm, fighting for each wheezing breath. Eliza flew to his side, guilt eating at her like acid. She should have been here, should have never left him alone. "Papa, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Hush, girl!" His hand, paper dry and weak, patted hers. "Storm would have taken you both if you'd been here. That young man, he's got good eyes." "Don't matchmake while you're dying," she said fiercely, mixing the medicine with shaking hands. "Not dying yet." He wheezed, then grew serious. "But maybe it's time to stop seeing every hand stretched our way as a chain. Liza, your mama, she was like that too. Afraid to owe anybody anything, afraid to be owned." He coughed, specks of red on his lips. "But there's a difference between being owned and being loved. Daughter, don't let fear of one keep you from the other." That night, word spread through town like wildfire. The sheriff was claiming Eliza had been carrying on with Vale during the storm, suggesting improprieties that would make any decent woman blush. The gossips at the Mercantile were having a field day. "Always knew that girl was too wild." Mrs. Pritchard, no relation to the sheriff, she insisted, announced to anyone who'd listen. Working like a man, refusing decent marriage offers, and now throwing herself at the first rich stranger who comes along. Eliza heard it all when she went to buy flour, keeping her head high even as whispers followed her like shadows. Let them talk. She had work to do. At the forge, she threw herself into Vale's order with desperate energy, working until her arms screamed and her eyes burned from the smoke. Each perfectly formed horseshoe, each precisely balanced tool was an answer to their whispers. She would meet her obligations through skill and sweat, owing nothing to anyone but honest labor. When Gideon stopped by the next evening to check on progress, she met him at the door, not inviting him in. "Your order's coming along on schedule," she said curtly. "No need for concern." He looked tired, dust in the lines around his eyes. "Actually, I came to see how your father was doing. Ramon mentioned he was poorly." The unexpected kindness caught her off guard. He's managing. There's a doctor in Fort Worth owes me a favor. I could send. No. The word came out sharper than intended. She softened it slightly. Thank you, but no. We take care of our own. He nodded slowly, but didn't leave. Miss Hart, I know what they're saying in town. About the storm, I want you to know I'll set anyone straight who speaks against your character in my hearing. Don't. She met his eyes squarely. That'll just convince them it's true. I've lived with their whispers all my life. I don't need defending. Everyone needs defending sometimes. Not me. She started to close the door. Good night, Mr. Vale. He caught the door gently, not forcing, just holding it open a moment longer. You know what I think? I think you're so used to fighting that you can't recognize when someone's on your side, but that's all right. I'm patient. He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. After all, I've got 2 weeks of business here. Plenty of time to prove I'm not your enemy. After he left, Eliza stood in the doorway, watching his silhouette disappear into the darkness. The forge glowed behind her, steady and reliable as always. But something had shifted in her chest, like a piece of metal heated just enough to become malleable. She shook off the feeling and returned to work. The iron didn't care about her fears or the town's gossip. It only cared about heat and pressure and skill. She could trust iron. It was people who were dangerous. But as she worked, she couldn't forget the shelter of his arms in the storm, or the sadness in his voice when he spoke of his mother. Couldn't forget that he'd let her go the moment she asked, respecting her pride even when it made no sense. In the darkness beyond the forge, coyotes called to each other across the vast emptiness. Eliza hammered on, each strike ringing out her determination to stand alone. Even as a treacherous part of her heart began to wonder what it might be like to stop fighting just once and let someone stand beside her instead. The fire started in the small hours before dawn, when the world was at its quietest and most vulnerable. Eliza woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the crackling of flames eating through the pile of sawdust and wood shavings near the back wall. Sparks from the banked forge must have found their way to the tinder-dry debris, a careless mistake that could cost everything. Papa! She grabbed the water bucket, knowing even as she threw it that it wasn't enough. The flames were already licking up the wall. Reaching for the roof beams, she hauled her father from his bed, his frail body weighing almost nothing as she half-carried, half-dragged him outside. His coughing turned to choking in the smoke, each breath a wet rattle that sent ice through her veins. "The forge!" he gasped. "Save the tools!" But she held him steady, torn between his life and their livelihood. Neighbors came running with more buckets, forming a line from the horse trough. Together they fought the flames back, saving the main structure, though the back wall was charred black and the roof partially collapsed. Dawn found Eliza kneeling beside her father's bed, watching his chest rise and fall with labored effort. The smoke had worsened his condition drastically. Each breath was a battle, and she could see him losing ground with every hour that passed. Dr. Morrison, the town drunk who served as Abalone Gulch's only medical man, shook his head grimly. "Needs medicine I don't have. Care I can't give. That sanatorium in Denver might could help, but..." He didn't need to finish. They both knew the cost was impossible. Vernon Lyle arrived before the ashes had even cooled, his banker's suit immaculate despite the early hour. He surveyed the damage with the satisfied air of a vulture settling on carrion. "Unfortunate accident," he said, not bothering to hide his smile. "Of course. Repairs will be costly, and with your father requiring medical attention..." He produced a document from his coat. "I'm prepared to make you a generous offer. Sign over the forge as collateral against your debts, and I'll ensure your father receives the best care available." Eliza read through the contract, her jaw tightening. It was written to ensure she'd never be able to repay, that the forge would become Lyle's within 6 months. "And I suppose you'd expect me to stay on as an employee," Or perhaps you have other services in mind. His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. A woman of your capabilities would certainly be an asset. I'm sure we could come to a mutually beneficial arrangement. Get out! Her voice was low, dangerous. Get out before I show you exactly what my capabilities include. Think carefully. Miss Hart, your father's life. I said get out. He left, but his parting words hung in the air like smoke. You have 3 days before I call in the existing notes. Then we'll see how proud you are. Eliza slumped against the wall, exhaustion and despair washing over her. 3 days, even working without sleep. She couldn't possibly. Miss Hart. She looked up to find Gideon Vale in the doorway, hat in hand. Behind him, she could see Ramon and several of his men unloading lumber from a wagon. Heard about the fire. Gideon said simply, brought materials to shore up that wall before it collapses entirely. I can't pay. I'm not asking you to. He stepped inside, and she saw the concern in his eyes as he took in her soot-stained face and shaking hands. Call it protecting my investment. Can't have my forge burning down before my order's complete. Your forge? Well, it's where my work's being done, so I figure I've got an interest in keeping it standing. He paused, then added quietly. Heard Lyle was sniffing around. Also heard you sent him packing. Not for long. He holds paper on this place, and I've got 3 days to pay or lose everything. Gideon was quiet for a moment, then pulled out a leather wallet. How much? No. The word came out fierce and immediate. I won't trade one master for another. Who's talking about mastery? He counted out bills anyway, setting them on the workbench. Consider it an advance on future work. Draw up a contract if it makes you feel better, say, exclusive forge services for my outfit for the next year at competitive rates. That's a business arrangement, not charity. Eliza stared at the money enough to pay Lyle and buy medicine for her father. Why would you do this? Because I need a reliable blacksmith, and you're the best I've seen. Because I don't like men like Lyle using tragedy to trap decent folk. Because... He stopped, running a hand through his hair. Because it's right. Isn't that enough? She picked up the bills slowly, each movement feeling like she was signing away pieces of herself. I'll draw up that contract, fair terms for both sides, and I'll pay back every cent of the advance. I know you will. He turned to go, then paused. For what it's worth. Miss Hart, there's no shame in accepting help. Strength isn't always about standing alone. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let others shore up your walls while you keep the forge burning. The work crew he'd brought was efficient and skilled. Within hours, they'd braced the damaged wall and patched the roof. Eliza worked alongside them when she wasn't tending her father, grateful for something to do with her hands while her mind churned. Sheriff Pritchard showed up mid-afternoon, ostensibly to investigate the fire. He poked through the debris with theatrical thoroughness, making notes in a small book. Suspicious origin. He announced loudly. Could be arson. Course. Sometimes folks set their own fires when they're desperate. Insurance money and all. We don't have insurance, Eliza said flatly. No. Well then, might be someone with a grudge. You haven't been making friends lately. Miss Hart, taking help from outsiders, refusing respectable offers from upstanding citizens like Mr. Lyle. He leaned in close, his breath foul. Accidents happen to stubborn women. Next time might be worse. Are you threatening me? Sheriff, warning you, for your own good. He tipped his hat mockingly. You might want to reconsider Lyle's offer. Man like that could ensure your safety. After he left, Eliza found her hands shaking with rage. She channeled it into her work, attacking the accumulated orders with fierce concentration. Each strike of the hammer was a blow against Pritchard, against Lyle, against everyone who thought they could force her to her knees. Ramon worked quietly beside her, his skilled hands sorting iron stock. The Mexican foreman was a man of few words, but his presence was steadying. "In my village," he said suddenly, not looking up from his work, "there was a woman like you. Fierro la Lamaban, the Iron One. She ran her father's shop after he died, wouldn't marry any of the men who tried to claim it through her." He smiled slightly. "She died at 80, still unmarried, still working her forge, but she trained a dozen apprentices, and they all called her Doña with respect no wife ever got. What's your point?" "No point, señorita. Just a story." He paused. "Though she did let the village help rebuild when earthquakes took her roof. Said it was harder to accept help than to give it, but both were necessary for a community to survive." That evening, Gideon returned to check on the repairs. He found Eliza at the forge, working by lamplight to finish a set of wagon springs. Her father slept fitfully in the corner, each breath a laborious effort. "You should rest," Gideon said quietly. "Can't. Too much to do." She didn't look up from her work. "Your advance bought me time, but I need to prove I can meet obligations, yours and others." He watched her work for a while, noting the efficient grace of her movements despite her exhaustion. "You know what I see when I look at you?" That made her pause. "A foolish woman too proud for her own good." "No, I see someone who's fought so long she's forgotten there's any other way to be. Someone who's built walls so high she can't see there are people on the other side wanting to help, not harm." She set down her hammer, finally meeting his eyes. "Pretty words, Mr. Vale, but words don't change facts. Every time I've trusted, every time I've let those walls down, I've paid for it. Then maybe you've been trusting the wrong people. Or maybe trust is a luxury people like me can't afford." He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his green eyes. "What are you so afraid of?" "Eliza." Her name on his lips was intimate, dangerous. "I'm not afraid." "Liar." The word was gentle, almost affectionate. "You're terrified. Not of the work or the debts or even men like Lyle. You're afraid that if you let someone matter, if you let yourself need anyone, you'll lose yourself." She wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. He was too close, seeing too much. "My mother was like that," he continued. "After my father died, she wouldn't accept help from anyone. Said we'd make our own way or starve trying. We nearly did starve. That first winter, pride doesn't fill empty bellies or keep children warm." "I'm not your mother." "No, you're not. You're stronger than she was. Strong enough to bend without breaking. Strong enough to accept help without losing yourself." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek where a smudge of soot marked the skin. Strong enough to let someone care about you without calling it ownership. For a moment, she stood frozen, caught between retreat and something far more dangerous. Then her father coughed, the sound wet and painful, breaking the spell. She stepped back, wrapping her arms around herself. "I need to finish this work." He nodded, accepting the dismissal. "The contract you mentioned, bring it by camp tomorrow. We'll sign it proper, make everything official. Business," he added with a slight smile. "Just business." After he left, Eliza worked until her eyes burned and her arms trembled, but his words echoed in her mind, persistent as the ring of hammer on anvil. When she finally banked the forge and prepared her father's medicine, she caught sight of herself in the small mirror by the wash basin. Soot-stained, exhausted, her hair escaping its braid in wild tendrils, she looked like someone who'd been fighting a war. And maybe she had been, all these years, fighting for survival, for respect, for independence. But wars had to end sometime, didn't they? And soldiers had to learn to live in peace, to trust their allies, to lower their weapons. She touched her cheek where his fingers had been, then shook her head fiercely. Not yet, maybe not ever. Trust was still a luxury she couldn't afford, no matter how gentle the hands offering it. Outside, a wolf howled in the darkness, answered by its pack. Even wolves, she thought, ran together. Even the strongest predators knew when to hunt alone and when to rely on others. But she wasn't ready to be part of anyone's pack. Not yet. Maybe not ever. The forge fire burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new work, new battles. But tonight, for just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to stop fighting, to let someone else stand guard while she rested. The thought terrified her more than any threat Lyle or Pritchard could make. The Grady gang appeared like smoke on the horizon. 8 riders moving fast along the old Apache trail that skirted the main road to town. News of their approach spread through Abalone Gulch like wildfire. They'd hit 3 wagon trains in as many weeks, leaving behind empty strongboxes and dead guards. Eliza was fitting new shoes on the minister's old mare when young Tommy Chen came running from his family's laundry, breathless with news. "Miss Hart, my father saw riders coming. Says to warn everyone, the Grady gang." She set down her tools carefully, mind already calculating. The weekly supply wagon was due in tomorrow, carrying medicine for her father among other necessities. If Grady's men hit it, "Tommy, run to the Vale camp. Tell Mr. Vale or Ramon what you told me." She pressed a penny into his hand. "Fast as you can." Word traveled quickly. Shop owners shuttered their windows. Mothers called children inside, and men checked their firearms with nervous fingers. Sheriff Pritchard was conspicuously absent, having ridden out that morning on urgent business in the next county. Gideon arrived within the hour, Ramon and 4 vaqueros with him. He found Eliza at the forge, working on something that definitely wasn't horseshoes. Wagon clamps. He picked up one of the finished pieces, examining the clever mechanism that could lock a wheel in seconds. "If they can't roll the wagons away, they'll have to stand and fight. Most bandits prefer easier prey." She wiped sweat from her brow, leaving another smudge. "I'm making sets for every wagon in town. The mechanisms can be removed quickly by anyone who knows the trick, but would take time to figure out otherwise." "Clever." He set the clamp down. "How many have you finished?" 6 sets. Need at least 4 more by dawn. "Then you'll need help." He shed his coat, rolling up his sleeves. "Put me to work." She started to protest, then stopped. This wasn't charity, this was survival. "Can you work a file? These edges need smoothing." They worked side by side as the afternoon wore on. Ramon and the vaqueros took shifts standing watch while helping where they could. The forge rang with purpose, drawing townsfolk like moths to flame. Soon, she had a production line going, the minister's wife sorting iron pieces, the Chinese families managing the bellows, even old Jonas from the saloon pumping water for the quench barrel. These were the people usually ignored or scorned, the Mexicans. The Chinese, the freedmen who'd drifted west after the war, the women who didn't fit neat categories of wife or daughter. But here at the forge, they worked as one, building their defense together. "Never seen anything quite like this," Gideon murmured, watching Mrs. Chen expertly sort metal by grade, despite claiming she knew nothing about smithing. "People rise to necessity," Eliza replied, then added quietly, "when someone bothers to ask them." As night fell, she demonstrated the wagon clamp mechanism to a gathered crowd. "2 turns here, slide this pin, and the wheel's locked. To release, push here while lifting, simple if you know how. Frustrating if you don't." Marcus Freeman, the former slave who worked the livery stable, raised a hand. "What about the horses? Grady's men might just cut them loose and ride off with them." Eliza smiled grimly. "That's why we're making these too." She held up a modified bridle with a locking mechanism. "Can't steal what they can't quickly untack." "You've thought of everything," someone said admiringly. "No," she corrected. "We've thought of everything. Together." The attack came at dawn. Grady's men swept down on the supply wagon 2 miles outside town, expecting easy pickings. Instead, they found the wagon wheels locked, the horses secured with Eliza's special bridles, and a contingent of armed townsfolk waiting behind hastily erected barriers. The bandits milled in confusion as their usual tactics failed. Tom Grady himself, a bear of a man with cold eyes and a crueler reputation, rode forward. Well, seems this dust hole got itself organized. His gaze swept the defenders, pausing on Eliza where she stood with a hammer in hand, not cowering, not hiding, but ready. Interesting welcoming committee. Turn around. Grady, Gideon called out, his rifle steady. Find easier prey. Grady laughed, an ugly sound. Or what you'll shoot us down in cold blood. Don't think your reputation extends to murder. Veil. Wouldn't be murder. Marcus Freeman spoke up, his own gun trained on the bandits. Be justice. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Then one of Grady's men tried to grab for the medical supplies, visible through the wagon's canvas. Eliza moved without thinking, her hammer flying true and striking his wrist with a crack that echoed across the desert. The man howled, dropping his gun. That's assault, Grady snarled. That's defensive property and persons. Eliza shot back. Maybe you're unclear on the law, but theft and attempted murder are still crimes, even out here. Grady's hand twitched toward his gun, but froze as a dozen rifles swung his way. The sound of hammers cocking was like crickets in the morning air. Seems you're outnumbered, Gideon observed mildly. And outsmarted, must sting, being foiled by a bunch of shopkeepers and a lady blacksmith. For a moment, violence trembled on the edge of erupting. Then Grady jerked his horse around. This isn't over. You can't guard every wagon, every water hole. We'll be back. And we'll be ready. Eliza called after them. As the bandits retreated, a cheer went up from the defenders. But Eliza noticed Gideon watching their dust trail with narrowed eyes. They'll be back, he said quietly when she approached. Men like Grady don't forgive humiliation. Then we'll be ready, like I said. He turned to study her, taking in the determined set of her jaw, the steady grip on her hammer. That was a hell of a throw. Where'd you learn that? You grow up in a forge. You learn to put tools exactly where you want them. She paused, then added, Thank you for organizing the defense, for not trying to keep me back with the women folk. Wouldn't dream of it. You're worth 3 men in a fight 4 if you're angry. His smile took any sting from the words. Besides, this was your plan. Your inventions saved that wagon. Our plan, she corrected, echoing her earlier words. I just made the tools. They walked back to town together, the supply wagon rolling safely between them. People called out thanks and congratulations. And for the first time in years, Eliza felt part of something larger than her own struggles. At the forge, she found her father awake and alert, having heard the commotion. Proud of you, girl, he wheezed. Your mother would be too. She always said the measure of a person wasn't in standing alone, but in standing for others. Rest, Papa, save your strength. But he caught her hand with surprising grip. Listen to me. That young man Vale, I see how he looks at you. More important, I see how he sees you. Not as property to claim or a prize to win, but as what you are. He coughed, struggled on. Don't let pride rob you of a chance at partnership. Liza, your mother and I, we were partners, made each other stronger, not weaker. Papa! Hush. Let me speak while I can. You've been fighting so long you've forgotten strength shared is strength doubled, not halved. His eyes, still bright despite the sickness, held hers. Trust isn't weakness, daughter. Sometimes it's the bravest thing a person can do. That evening, Gideon stopped by with the medicine from the supply wagon. He found Eliza cleaning and organizing the tools used in their defense, preparing for whatever came next. Brought something else, he said, producing a leather journal. Thought you might want to write down those designs. They're ingenious, could help other towns facing similar troubles. She took the journal slowly, running her fingers over the smooth cover. I've never thought of my work that way. as something worth preserving, then you haven't been paying attention. Half the town's talking about patenting those wagon locks. He leaned against the workbench, casual but watchful. You've got a gift, Eliza, not just for working metal, but for solving problems, bringing people together. They came together themselves. You just gave them the tools and the reason. That's leadership. He straightened, moving closer. You know what else I noticed today when Grady threatened the town? You didn't think about running or hiding. You thought about defending it. This place matters to you. It's my home. No, it's more than that. These people matter to you, the ones others overlook, the ones without power or position. You fight for them as fierce as you fight for yourself. His voice dropped. Do you know how rare that is? How remarkable? She felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the forge. I do what needs doing. You do more than that, and you know it. He was close now, close enough that she could see dust motes dancing in the lamplight between them. Just like you know there's something between us that has nothing to do with business contracts or debts owed. Gideon. His given name slipped out without thought. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give, he said quietly. But I'm not going to pretend I don't see you. Eliza Hart, all of you, the fighter, the protector, the woman who'd rather burn than bend, and I'm sure as hell not going to apologize for admiring every stubborn, magnificent inch of you. The air between them crackled like lightning before a storm. For a moment, she swayed toward him, drawn by something stronger than logic or fear. Then the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. Ramon appeared in the doorway. Senor Vale, we have a problem. Our scouts report Grady's making camp at Willow Springs right where we plan to water the herd tomorrow. Gideon's expression hardened. Of course he is. He's trying to force a confrontation away from town, where he'll have the advantage. What will you do? Eliza asked. We can't reach the next water for 40 miles. The cattle won't make it. We'll have to fight or find another way. She turned back to her forge. Mind already working. Give me tonight. There might be another option. Eliza, trust me. She met his eyes. You asked what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of losing people who matter. So let me help. Let me matter too. Something shifted in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or hope. You already matter, more than you know. After they left, Eliza worked through the night, shaping metal and strategy with equal determination. By dawn, she had a plan dangerous. Perhaps foolish, but better than a pitched battle that would leave good men dead. She'd spent so long protecting herself from being owned. Now, facing the threat to her town and the people she'd come to care for, she understood what her father meant. Partnership wasn't about possession, it was about choosing to stand together, to forge something stronger than either could create alone. The real test would come tomorrow, at Willow Springs. But tonight, in the glow of her forge, she began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was brave enough to trust. The storm built all morning as they drove the herd toward Willow Springs. Not a dust storm this time, but a proper thunderhead rolling in from the mountains, purple-black and gravid with violence. The cattle sensed it, bellowing uneasily as lightning flickered in the distance. Eliza rode alongside the chuck wagon, her hastily modified equipment secured in the bed. She'd never worked cattle before, but Gideon had insisted she stay with the main group rather than ride ahead with the scouts. If this goes bad, I want you where I can see you, he'd said, and something in his tone had stopped her usual protest. Thunder cracked overhead like God's own hammer striking an anvil. The lead steers tossed their heads, eyes rolling white with fear. Ramon and the vaqueros worked frantically to keep them bunched, but 3,000 head of longhorn cattle were a force of nature unto themselves when panic set in. They're going to run, Ramon shouted over the wind. Lightning struck a dead cottonwood not 50 yards away. The explosion of splintering wood like a cannon shot. That did it. The herd surged forward in a wall of horn and hide and thundering hooves. stampeding directly toward the rocky ground near Willow Springs, where Grady's men waited in ambush. "Let them run!" Gideon yelled. "Stay clear!" But Eliza saw what he couldn't from his position, little Sarah Chen, the laundryman's daughter who'd begged to ride along to see the Cowboys, standing frozen directly in the path of the stampede. The child had wandered from the chuck wagon to pick wildflowers, and now stood clutching her small bouquet as death bore down on her in 1,000 pounding hooves. Eliza didn't think. She kicked her borrowed horse hard, driving straight across the face of the stampede. Time stretched strange. She could see individual raindrops, count the points on each horn, feel her horse's muscles bunch and release beneath her. Sarah's face was white with terror, her mouth open in a scream swallowed by thunder. She leaned from the saddle at full gallop, hooking the child around the waist and hauling her up. For one endless moment they hung suspended between safety and destruction, the lead steers so close she could smell their breath. Then her horse found an extra burst of speed, carrying them clear as the herd thundered past, missing them by inches. She didn't stop until they reached a cluster of boulders, both of them gasping. Sarah clutching her tight enough to crack ribs. Only then did she realize Gideon had followed, had been there ready to grab them both if she'd fallen. "That was the most foolhardy, reckless, damn brave thing I've ever seen," he said, his voice rough. Rain had plastered his hair to his head, and his eyes held something wild. "Don't ever do it again." "Sarah," Eliza began, but suddenly strong hands framed her face and Gideon was kissing her, fierce and desperate, like a man who just watched everything he valued nearly get trampled into dust. For a heartbeat she froze. Then something broke loose inside her, all the walls, all the careful distance, all the resistance crumbling like sand before floodwater. She kissed him back with equal desperation, tasting rain and dust and life itself, while Sarah squirmed between them, squeaking protests about being squished. He pulled back just far enough to rest his forehead against hers, both of them breathing hard. "Eliza Hart," he said roughly, "you terrify me more than any stampede ever could." The moment shattered as gunfire erupted from the springs. Grady's men had opened up on the scattered riders, trying to pick them off in the chaos. But the stampede had worked both ways. The cattle had overrun several of the ambush positions, scattering the bandits. "Get Sarah safe," Gideon ordered, already turning his horse toward the fight. "Like hell," Eliza shot back. "Sarah, hold tight to the saddle horn and don't let go." She pulled the modified scattergun from her saddle holster, another of her innovations, loaded with rock salt instead of lead shot. "You want a partner or not? Vale." He grinned suddenly, wild and free. "God help me, yes." They rode together into the melee. The storm had turned Willow Springs into a hellscape of mud and confusion. Cattle milled everywhere. Rain made visibility near zero, and muzzle flashes lit up like fireflies in the gray. Eliza's rock salt loads proved devastatingly effective, painful, and disorienting without being lethal, taking bandits out of the fight without making her a killer. She saw Marcus Freeman and two other townsmen who joined the drive fighting back to back, using her wagon-lock shields as portable cover. Through it all, Gideon stayed close, the two of them moving in instinctive harmony. When a bandit drew a bead on her, his shot knocked the gun away. When his horse slipped in the mud, she was there to steady him. Partnership. She realized with crystalline clarity, this was what her father had meant. The fight was brief but vicious. Grady himself tried to rally his men, but between the storm, the stampede, and the unexpected resistance, they were in full retreat within minutes. The big outlaw locked eyes with Eliza across the battlefield, his gaze promising retribution, before spurring his horse into the downpour. As quickly as it had come, the storm began to pass. Sun broke through the clouds in long slanted rays, turning the rain to golden curtains. The surviving cattle, their panic spent, began to graze placidly as if nothing had happened. "Is it over?" Sarah whispered, still clutched against Eliza's chest. "For now, sweetling, you're safe." She smoothed the child's hair, hands only now beginning to shake as the aftermath hit. They made camp at the springs, posting heavy guards. Eliza found herself at the center of a crowd, everyone wanting to thank her for saving Sarah, for the innovations that had protected them, for riding with them instead of staying safe in town. "Never seen nothing like it," Old Cookie declared, pressing a cup of his terrible coffee into her hands. "You rode that stampede like you were born to it."
"Lucky,"
she managed, though her legs felt like water. "Weren't luck," Marcus Freeman disagreed. "That was pure guts and good heart, same as them locks and shields. You see what needs doing and you do it, no matter the cost to yourself." Later, as the camp settled for the night, she found herself sitting by the spring, watching stars appear in the rain-washed sky. Her father's words echoed, "Strength shared is strength doubled, not halved." Gideon found her there, settling beside her with careful movements.
"How's the terror level?"
"Receding," she admitted. "Yours?" "May never recover." He was quiet a moment. "When I saw you ride into that stampede, Eliza, I've lost people before, people who mattered. I can't—" He stopped, started again. "I know you value your independence above everything. I respect that, but watching you nearly die made something very clear to me." She waited, heart hammering. "I love you," he said simply. "Not the idea of you, not the challenge of winning you over. You, the woman who faces down bandits with a hammer, who builds communities out of outcasts, who rides into stampedes to save children. I love your courage and your stubbornness and even your damnable pride. And I'll take whatever you're willing to give, for however long you're willing to give it. But I needed you to know." The words hung between them like stars bright, distant, beautiful, and terrifying. She stopped, swallowed. "Today, when we fought together, when we moved like two parts of the same whole, that's what scared me most. Not the stampede, not the bullets. That, because I've been alone so long, I don't know how to be anything else." "You're not alone now," he said quietly. "Haven't been for a while. If you'd let yourself see it. The whole town, this outfit, we're all bound together, stronger for it." She thought of the forge, surrounded by people working in common cause, of her father's gentle wisdom, of Sarah's weight in her arms and the wild freedom of that kiss in the rain. "My mother died when I was 12, she said suddenly. "Fever took her fast, but before she went, she made my father promise to teach me the trade. Said a woman should have skills that couldn't be taken away, couldn't be dependent on any man's goodwill. I think I twisted that teaching, made it mean I couldn't depend on anyone, ever." "Your mother sounds wise." "She was, but I don't think she meant for me to be alone, just careful who I chose to stand with." She turned to look at him directly. "I'm still scared, of needing you, of losing myself, of becoming some shadow of what I am." "Then we go slow," he said. "We figure it out together, equal partners, like in the fight today. I don't want to own you. Eliza, I want to stand beside you, face whatever comes together. Your strength doesn't diminish mine, it doubles it." She thought of the stampede, of that moment when death had seemed certain until it wasn't. Life was risk. Love was risk. But maybe some risks were worth taking. "Gideon Vale," she said formally. "I believe I might be falling in love with you too. God help us both." His smile was like sunrise after storm. "He already has. We're both still breathing, aren't we?" She laughed, surprising herself. Then, with careful deliberation, she reached out and took his hand, his fingers interlaced with hers. Work rough and steady. Not a chain, not a cage, a connection, freely chosen. They sat together watching the stars wheel overhead, hands linked, while around them the camp settled into sleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Grady was still out there, Pritchard and Lyle still scheming, the drought still threatening. But tonight, she'd chosen trust over fear, partnership over solitude. In the distance, coyotes sang to the clearing sky. The sound no longer seemed lonely to her. It was a chorus, a community, a celebration of survival, like the town she protected, like the man beside her, like the future spreading out before them, uncertain but no longer solitary. She squeezed Gideon's hand and felt him squeeze back, strong enough to stand alone, choosing to stand together. It wasn't the ending of her story, it was a new chapter entirely. The funeral was simple, as Caleb Hart would have wanted. Eliza stood at the graveside with dry eyes, having shed her tears in private through the long night vigil. The whole town had come. Even those who'd whispered about her choices stood respectfully as Reverend Morrison spoke words of comfort over the pine coffin she'd built with her own hands. "Caleb Hart was a craftsman," the Reverend said, his voice carrying across the small cemetery. "He shaped iron, but more than that, he shaped character. In his daughter, we see his greatest work strength tempered with compassion, skill wedded to service." Gideon stood close but not presumptuous, letting her have her space while making it clear he was there if needed. The other mourners included all those who'd become her extended family, the Chens, Marcus Freeman, Ramon, and the Vaqueros, the mixed congregation of outcasts who'd found community at her forge. She'd made the grave marker herself a simple iron cross, but worked with all her skill, incorporating small symbols of her father's life. A hammer and tongs crossed at the base, horseshoes forming a border, and worked into the metal itself, nearly invisible unless you knew to look partner and teacher, father and friend. As dirt fell on the coffin, Eliza finally spoke. "He taught me everything I know about iron, but more than that, he taught me about people, how heat and pressure can break or bond, how the strongest metals are often alloys, mixtures that are greater than their separate parts." Her voice stayed steady through will alone. "He died knowing I'd learned that lesson. That's all any parent can ask." The crowd dispersed slowly, many stopping to press her hand or murmur condolences. Sheriff Pritchard had the gall to appear, reeking of whiskey even at midday. "Shame about your father," he said, not bothering to feign sincerity. "Course, a woman alone, trying to run a business, well, these troubles have a way of compounding. She's not alone, Mrs., Chen said firmly, moving to stand beside Eliza. Others followed the entire community, closing ranks around her. Pritchard's face darkened. "You people forget who keeps order in this town." "No," Marcus Freeman said quietly. "We remember exactly what kind of order you keep. Question is, how long you think it'll last?" The threat hung in the air until Gideon stepped forward. "Sheriff, I believe you have business elsewhere. This is a time for mourning, not politics." For a moment, violence trembled on the edge of erupting. Then Pritchard spat tobacco juice near Gideon's boots and stalked away. But his parting look promised trouble. At the forge that evening, Vernon Lyle was waiting with papers in hand and 2 hired guns at his back. The banker's vulture smile made Eliza's skin crawl. "Miss Hart, my condolences on your loss. However, business doesn't pause for grief. Your father signed these loan documents, which are now due. Unless you can pay in full with interest, I'm afraid I'll have to foreclose." She took the papers, scanning them quickly. Her heart sank. The signature was her father's, but shaky, dated from when he was deep in fever. The terms were usurious, the kind only a desperate or delirious man would accept. "This was signed under duress," she said flatly, "when he was too sick to understand." "That's a serious accusation. Can you prove it in court with Judge Harlan, who happens to be my brother-in-law, presiding?" Lyle's smile widened. "I thought not. You have 3 days to pay or vacate." "How much?" Gideon asked quietly. Lyle named a sum that made everyone present gasp. "Though I might be willing to negotiate alternative arrangements. A beautiful woman like Miss Hart has assets that could prove valuable." The forge rang with sudden silence. Eliza's hands curled into fists. But before she could speak or throw the punch building in her shoulders, Gideon stepped forward. "I'll pay it." "No." The word cracked like a whip from Eliza's lips.
"This is my fight."
"Actually," a new voice interjected, "it's our fight." Ramon entered, followed by a mixed crowd of townspeople. "Senor Val, Senorita Hart, we have been talking. This forge is the heart of our community. We would like to make an offer." Tommy Chen's father stepped forward. "We propose to buy shares in the forge, small amounts from many people. Together, we have enough to pay this debt and provide operating capital."
"A joint stock company,"
Reverend Morrison added, "with Miss Hart as master smith and majority holder, but owned by the community it serves." Eliza stared at them, speechless for once. These people, many of whom had little to spare, were offering their savings to keep her forge alive.
I can't accept this,"
she managed.
"Cannot or will not, Mrs."
Chen asked gently. "You helped us all. Let us help you." "It's business," Marcus Freeman added with a slight smile. "We're investing in something that makes our town stronger. Just happens to help a friend at the same time." Lyle's face had gone purple. "You can't, this is highly irregular." "But legal," Gideon observed. "Would you like to count the money here? Or shall we handle the transaction at your bank with witnesses?" "Of course." What followed was a procession unlike any Abalone Gulch had seen. Nearly 40 people marched to the bank, pooling their resources. Eliza walked among them, humbled and overwhelmed. When they reached the counter, she watched Lyle count the money with shaking hands, forced to write a receipt marking the debt paid in full. "This isn't over," he hissed. "You've made powerful enemies." "And powerful friends," she countered. "I'll take that trade." Outside the bank, snow began to fall, unusual for the season. But the northern wind had brought an early winter storm. Fat flakes drifted down, transforming the dusty town into something almost magical. "We should get inside." Someone said, "This could be a bad one." But organizing 40 people proved challenging. Families scattered to various buildings as the snow fell harder, visibility dropping to mere feet. Eliza found herself separated from the main group, the forge still blocks away. "This way." Gideon appeared from the swirling white, catching her hand. They ducked into the nearest shelter, an old storage shed behind the mercantile. The wind howled outside, snow already piling against the door. "We might be here a while," he observed, shaking snow from his coat. The shed was small, filled with crates and barrels. They found a relatively clear corner and huddled together for warmth. Eliza shivered her grief, and the day's emotions had left her vulnerable to the cold. Without hesitation, Gideon wrapped his coat around them both, pulling her close. She tensed for a moment, then relaxed into his warmth. This wasn't the desperate clutch of the dust storm. This was shelter freely offered and freely accepted. "Your father would have been proud today," he said quietly. "Seeing what you've built, not just the forge, the community."
"He knew," she whispered. "At the end, he said he was leaving me wealthy. I thought the fever had taken his wits, but he meant this. These connections, these people."
They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the storm. Then, so soft he almost missed it, she spoke again. "I've been thinking about what you said, about partnership, about facing things together." He waited, knowing she needed to find her own words. "When everyone came together today, that's what you meant. Isn't it not losing myself, but finding a bigger self, a connected self?" "Yes." She pulled back just enough to see his face in the dim light. The blacksmith's daughter resisted temptation until the rich cowboy pulled her close. A slight smile played at her lips. "Except it wasn't temptation I was resisting. It was trust, connection, the possibility that I could be more with others than alone." "And now?" She took a breath. "Now I choose to stop resisting, to stop fighting what's already true.
I love you, Gideon Vale, and that terrifies me, but not as much as the thought of losing you to pride." He cupped her face gently, thumb brushing away a snowflake on her cheek. "I'll never ask you to be less than you are, only to let me stand beside you." "Then stand," she whispered, and kissed him. This kiss was different from the desperate one in the rain. This was a choice, deliberate and clear-eyed, a forging of something new from two separate strengths. When they parted, both were breathless. "When this storm passes," he said, "I have something to ask you. Something proper, with witnesses and probably half the town offering opinions." She laughed, surprising herself. "Let me guess, a business proposition." "The most important merger of my life," he agreed solemnly, then grinned. "Though I should warn you, I come with significant assets, cattle, land holdings, water rights. And I come with a forge, a stubborn streak, and apparently 40 business partners who'll have opinions about everything." "Sounds like a fair trade to me." The storm raged outside, but in their small shelter, warmth bloomed. Not just from shared body heat, but from something deeper, the warmth of acceptance, of partnership, of love acknowledged and embraced. When the snow finally stopped, they emerged to find the town transformed. White blankets softened every harsh edge, made every shabby building look clean and new. People emerged from various shelters, laughing at their snow-crowned heads, helping each other navigate the drifts. "It's beautiful," Eliza breathed. "New beginnings usually are," Gideon agreed, taking her hand. They walked back to the forge together, their joined hands visible to all who cared to look. Let them talk, Eliza thought. She'd spent so long fighting their whispers, their judgments. Now she had something more important, a community that had claimed her as surely as she'd claimed it, and a partner who saw her strength as something to celebrate, not conquer. At the forge, she found someone had already stoked the fire. The warmth beckoned, and people began gathering, sharing food someone had thought to bring, telling stories of weathering the storm. Her forge had become what her father had always envisioned, not just a place of work, but a hearth for the community. "Miss Hart," Tommy Chen tugged at her skirt, "are you going to marry Mr. Vale?" The room fell silent, everyone suddenly very interested in her answer. She looked at Gideon, who was trying very hard to appear casual while obviously hanging on her response. "Well, Tommy," she said seriously, "that depends. Do you think the Ford shareholders should vote on it?" The laughter that followed was warm as summer rain, and in that moment, surrounded by chosen family in her father's forge, with snow falling soft outside and Gideon's hand warm in hers, Eliza Hart knew she was exactly where she belonged. Not alone, not owned, but partnered in business, in community, and in love. The transformation was complete. The woman who'd resisted connection had become its anchor, and the forge that had once stood solitary now glowed at the heart of something larger, stronger, and infinitely more beautiful than anything she could have built alone. Spring came early to Abalone Gulch, melting the snow and filling the arroyos with rushing water. The courthouse had been swept and garnished for what Sheriff Pritchard grandly called a public hearing regarding the ownership of the Hart Forge, though everyone knew it was a kangaroo court designed to strip Eliza of her property through legal trickery. Judge Harlan, Lyle's brother-in-law, sat behind the bench looking like a well-fed toad in black robes. Beside him, Pritchard lounged with theatrical authority, star pinned crooked on his vest. The courtroom packed full not just with townsfolk, but with strangers, hard-faced men who kept their hands near their guns. This hearing will determine the rightful ownership of the property known as Hart Forge. Judge Harlan intoned, "Mr. Vernon Lyle has presented documents suggesting irregularities in the recent transfer of shares." What irregularities? Eliza stood tall in her best dress, ledger in hand. Every transaction is recorded here, witnessed and signed. Signatures can be forged. Lyle said smoothly,
Witnesses can be unreliable, especially when they're Chinese, Mexican, or colored folk who might not understand proper business practices. An angry murmur ran through the crowd. Eliza felt Gideon tense beside her, but she touched his arm lightly. This was her fight to lead. Every person who bought shares is a legal resident of this territory. She stated clearly, their money spends the same as yours. Mr. Lyle. Their signatures are just as binding. Perhaps, Judge Harlan said with oily condescension. But there's also the matter of back taxes. Sheriff Pritchard has discovered significant arrears. Discovered where? Reverend Morrison stood up. In files that didn't exist until last week. I've been keeping the town records for 15 years. Judge, those tax bills are fabrications. Are you calling me a liar? Reverend Pritchard's hand drifted to his gun. If the boot fits, Marcus Freeman said quietly, rising to stand beside the minister. The tension ratcheted higher. Through the window, Eliza glimpsed more armed strangers positioning themselves on the street. This wasn't just about her forge anymore. This was about power, about who controlled Abalone Gulch. I have here, she said, pulling out a wrapped document. The original land grant for this property, transferred from the Spanish governor to my mother's family in 1842, legal under Mexican law, recognized by the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and filed with the territorial office. She laid it on the judge's bench. Any taxes owed would be against this original grant, not the improvements, and those taxes have been paid yearly, as these receipts show. Harlan's face darkened as he realized she'd outmaneuvered him on legal grounds, but Lyle wasn't finished. There's still the matter of moral fitness, he said. An unmarried woman, consorting with drifters and undesirables, operating a business more suited to men. Actually, Gideon interrupted, standing slowly. Miss Hart won't be unmarried much longer. We're engaged, with the wedding set for next month. As for the forge being unwomanly work, he smiled coldly. I'd invite any man here to match her skill, though I doubt any would dare try. Engaged, Pritchard sneered. How convenient. And I suppose you'll be taking over the forge once you're married, making all this legal theater unnecessary. No, Eliza's voice rang clear. The forge remains mine, held in trust for the community shareholders. Mr. Vale has his own business interests. We're partners, not owner and property. Highly irregular, Judge Harlan muttered, but completely legal. A new voice said from the doorway. A distinguished man in a federal marshal's badge entered, followed by two deputies. Marshal James Crawford, I've been investigating reports of corruption in this jurisdiction. Seems I arrived just in time. Pritchard went white. Now hold on, Marshal. This is a local matter. Tax fraud is a federal crime. So is intimidation of witnesses and conspiracy to deprive citizens of their legal property. Crawford's eyes were cold as winter steel. Sheriff, I'll need to see your books. All of them. Judge Harlan, you might want to recuse yourself from any cases involving your brother-in-law. Conflict of interest and all. You can't just ride in here, Lyle blustered. Actually, did, and brought friends. Crawford smiled thinly. Funny thing, when Miss Hart's friends wrote to the governor about the situation here, he was very interested. Seems he's heard complaints about this town before. Never could prove anything. Until now. What followed was swift as an avalanche. Ramon produced the water rights map, proving Pritchard had been taking bribes. Misses. Chen presented evidence that Lyle had been charging Chinese and Mexican families illegal fees. The minister had documented years of tax irregularities. But the finishing blow came from an unexpected source. Young Billy Grimes. The 17-year-old who'd ridden with Grady's gang until Eliza pulled him wounded from the fight, stepped forward. I got something to say, he announced, voice shaking but determined. Sheriff Pritchard hired us, Grady's gang, paid us to raid wagons, Make trouble, keep folks scared so they'd pay his protection money. I got proof letters in Pritchard's own hand. The courtroom erupted. Pritchard lunged for his gun, but Crawford's deputies were faster. In seconds, the sheriff was disarmed and shackled. Through the windows, federal marshals were rounding up the hired guns. Court is adjourned. Judge Harlan squeaked, trying to sidle toward the door.
"Oh, I don't think so,"
Crawford said pleasantly. "You'll want to stay while we discuss your involvement, but first," he turned to the crowd, "I believe there was a matter of forged ownership to settle as a federal officer. I'm empowered to witness legal documents. Shall we make those share transfers official and binding?" What followed was the strangest court proceeding in territorial history. One by one, the shareholders came forward, stating their investment publicly. Crawford recorded each one, making it federal record. By the end, the Hart Forge was legally established as a community trust, with Eliza as master smith and managing partner. "Anything else?" Crawford asked dryly. "Well," Tommy Chen piped up, "Miss Hart and Mr. Vale are getting married. You could witness that too." Laughter rippled through the crowd, the first genuine joy heard in that courtroom in years.
"Tommy,"
Eliza protested, blushing.
"Actually,"
Gideon said, dropping to one knee right there in front of God and everyone. "He has a point. Eliza Hart, you've already agreed to marry me. Why wait, unless you need time to forge your own wedding ring?" She stared at him, then at the crowd of friends and neighbors, all leaning forward expectantly. This wasn't how she'd imagined it. No flowers, no fancy dress, no careful planning. Just a courtroom full of people who'd become family. A federal marshal as witness, and the man she loved waiting for her answer. "You're serious?" "Never more so. Marry me now, today. We'll have a proper celebration later. But let's start our partnership with the community that made it possible." She looked around the room at Mrs. Chen dabbing her eyes, at Marcus Freeman grinning wide, at Ramon nodding approval, at young Billy Grimes watching with desperate hope that redemption was possible. Even Marshal Crawford seemed amused. "Reverend Morrison," she said finally, "are you prepared to perform a wedding?" "Always." He beamed, producing a worn Bible from his coat. "Then yes." She helped Gideon to his feet, her hands steady in his. "But I'm keeping my name. The Forge stays Hart's, no matter what. Wouldn't have it any other way." He agreed. The ceremony was brief and unconventional. Eliza wore her court dress, practical brown wool with minimal lace. Gideon's coat showed trail dust. Their witnesses included Chinese launderers, Mexican vaqueros, former slaves, reformed outlaws, and a federal marshal who'd seen everything but admitted this was a first. When Reverend Morrison reached "Speak now or forever hold your peace," everyone turned to glare at Lyle and Harlan, both under guard. Neither said a word. "Do you, Eliza Hart, take this man as your partner in life, to stand beside as equal, to face whatever comes with courage and grace?"
"I do."
"Do you, Gideon Vale, take this woman as your partner in life, respecting her independence while sharing your strength, building a future together without diminishing what she's built alone?" "I do." "Then, by the authority vested in me by this territory and witnessed by this community, I pronounce you married, partners in law as in life. You may kiss your bride, Mr. Vale." The kiss was brief but thorough, earning cheers and a few good-natured whoops. When they parted, Eliza was surprised to find her eyes wet. "Tears," Gideon murmured, "from my iron-willed blacksmith." "Happy ones," she admitted.
"I never thought, this isn't how I imagined things happening."
Better or worse than imagined. She looked around at their makeshift wedding party, at the community that had literally fought for her right to exist as herself, at the man who'd never once asked her to be less than she was. "Better," she said firmly. "Forged in fire, tested by storm. The strongest bonds are made under pressure.
Marshal Crawford cleared his throat.
Congratulations to the happy couple. Now, about these prisoners. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Pritchard, Lyle, and Judge Harlan were taken into federal custody. The town council met hastily to appoint Marcus Freeman as interim sheriff, the first black lawman in the territory. The water rights were returned to public use, and somehow, despite everything, a wedding celebration materialized at the forge. Mrs. Chen and the other women had been cooking all day, just in case. Musicians appeared with fiddles and guitars. Someone strung lanterns. The forge's yard transformed into a dance floor, with the ring of hammer on anvil replaced by music and laughter.
Not bad for a shotgun wedding, Gideon observed, spinning Eliza through a waltz. Though, technically, it was more of a gavel wedding. It was perfect, she said, meaning it. Messy and chaotic and real, like us.
Mrs. Vale.
Miss Hart, she corrected with a smile. In business and in life, though Mrs. Vale for social occasions, if you insist.
I insist on nothing except your happiness, he said seriously. And your safety. Grady's still out there. This isn't over.
No, she agreed, glancing at the star-filled sky beyond the lanterns. But we're stronger now, all of us. Whatever comes, we'll face it.
Billy Grimes approached hesitantly as the song ended. Miss Hart, Mr. Vale, I wanted to thank you for giving me a chance, for believing I could be better.
Everyone deserves a second chance, Billy, Eliza said gently. What matters is what you do with it.
I want to learn the smithing trade.
I mean, if you'll teach me. She studied him young, earnest, desperately wanting to prove himself. She saw herself at that age, stubborn and determined to make her own way. Be at the forge at dawn. We'll see if you have the hands for it.
His face lit up like Christmas morning. Yes, ma'am, I won't let you down.
As he scampered off, Gideon chuckled.
Collecting strays already.
Building a future, she corrected. The forge needs apprentices. The town needs young people with skills and hope. She paused. We need to be more than just survivors. We need to thrive.
And we will, he said confidently, with you hammering us all into shape. The party continued late into the night. At some point, Eliza found herself standing apart, watching the celebration with wonder. Her father's forge had become the heart of something larger, a community that crossed all lines of race and class and origin, bound together by shared struggle and mutual respect.
He'd be proud, Gideon said quietly,
joining her.
He is,
she said, feeling it true in her bones.
Wherever he is, he's smiling at this chaos.
A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another. But tonight, the sound didn't speak of loneliness or danger. Tonight, it was just another voice in the chorus of life continuing despite all odds.
Ready to go home? Gideon asked eventually.
I am home, she said, gesturing at the forge. The people, the life they'd built and defended together. We both are. He kissed her temple gently. Then let's make sure it stays that way, together.
Together, she agreed, and meant it with every fiber of her iron-strengthened heart.
They came in the dead hours before dawn, when the town slept deepest and the watch was changing. The first sign of trouble was the acrid smell of smoke, not the clean smoke of hearth fires, but the chemical stench of kerosene splashed on wood and set ablaze.
Eliza jolted awake to the clanging of the fire bell, Gideon already reaching for his gun. Through their window above the forge, they could see orange flames licking at the grain warehouse on Main Street.
Grady, she said, not a question but grim certainty. The remaining gang members had come for revenge, choosing fire as their weapon, the one thing that could destroy a wooden frontier town in minutes. As people stumbled from their homes to fight the flames, raiders emerged from the shadows, shooting wild to sow panic while they looted what they could. The forge! Eliza gasped, realizing their strategy. While everyone fought the fire, the gang would hit the real target, the symbol of the town's resistance. They raced downstairs to find Billy Grimes already there, frantically loading the new repeating rifles Eliza had modified with improved sights. Ramon burst through the door seconds later with 3 vaqueros. "They're coming," he panted. "Saw riders circling behind the church." Eliza's mind raced. The forge's stone walls made it defensible, but they were outnumbered. Then she remembered the preparations they'd made after the last attack, the metal shields, the reinforced shutters, the surprises she'd built into the very structure. "Billy, get those rifles to the windows. Ramon, take your men to the roof. There's cover behind the chimney." She grabbed her hammer and the modified shotgun. "Gideon." "I'm with you," he said simply, checking his revolvers. "Always." The attack came fast and vicious. Windows shattered under the first volley, but the reinforced shutters held. Eliza yanked a lever she'd installed weeks ago, and iron plates dropped into place over the vulnerable openings, leaving only gun slits. "Clever girl," someone outside snarled Grady himself. "But iron won't save you when we burn you out like rats." Through the slits, she could see torches approaching, but Eliza smiled grimly and pulled another lever. Hidden pipes released water from the roof cistern, dousing the walls. She'd learned from the last firewater storage was now part of the forge's defenses. The shooting intensified. Billy proved surprisingly steady, his aim true as he picked off raiders trying to approach. Ramon's men held the roof, their position giving them clear shots at anyone in the yard. But there were so many attackers, and ammunition wouldn't last forever. "Miss Hart." Young Tommy Chen appeared at the back door. How he'd gotten through the fight, she couldn't imagine. "My father says to tell you the militia is coming. Marcus Freeman is leading them." Hope flared, but Grady must have heard too. His next attack was desperate, concentrated on the main door. The heavy oak splintered under the assault. "They're breaking through," Billy yelled. Eliza made a decision that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Everyone to the center of the forge now." As her defenders pulled back, she ran to the forge itself, where coals still glowed from the previous day's work. Her hands flew over controls she'd installed but never tested, based on principles her father had theorized but never implemented. "What are you doing?" Gideon demanded, firing at shadows in the doorway. "Trust me." She connected pipes, opened valves, and pumped the bellows frantically. "When I say down, everyone drop flat." The door gave way. Grady's men poured in, expecting easy victims. Instead, they found Eliza standing beside her forge like an avenging angel, one hand on a release valve. "Welcome to Hart's Forge," she said coldly. "Let me show you what we make here." She pulled the valve. Superheated steam exploded from pipes around the room's perimeter, not enough to kill, but enough to scald and blind. The raiders screamed, stumbling back. In the chaos, her people rose and fought. It was brutal. Close-quarters combat. Gideon shot a man off Eliza's back. She swung her hammer to save Billy from a knife. Ramon and his men fired point-blank into the mass of intruders. Through the steam and gun smoke, she saw him, Tom Grady himself, raising a gun toward Gideon's unprotected side. Time slowed. She couldn't reach Gideon in time, couldn't shout a warning over the noise, but she could throw. The hammer left her hand in a perfect arc, 20 years of practice behind it. It struck Grady's wrist with a crack audible even over the fighting. His shot went wide, and Gideon spun, putting 2 bullets center mass. The outlaw leader crumpled, his reign of terror ending on the forge's soot-stained floor. The remaining raiders broke and ran, only to meet Marcus Freeman's militia in the street. The Battle of Hart's Forge, as it would be known, was over in minutes but felt like hours. As the steam cleared and the wounded were tended, Eliza found herself sitting on the floor, shaking with reaction. Her beautiful forge was a wreck, bullet holes, bloodstains. The steam pipes twisted from their emergency use. "We'll rebuild," Gideon said, sliding down beside her. A graze on his cheek bled freely, but he was whole, alive.
Always rebuilding, she murmured. When does it end?
When we stop fighting for what matters, he replied. So, never. Despite everything, she laughed. The cleanup took days, to everyone's surprise. Judge Harlan's replacement arrived quickly, a young woman named Patricia Thornton, the territory's first female judge. She took one look at the situation and began issuing rulings that actually followed the law rather than local prejudice. Interesting steam defense system. Judge Thornton told Eliza, "Have you considered patenting it?" Among the wounded was the 17-year-old who'd chosen differently than Billy shot in the shoulder, frightened and defiant by turns. Eliza visited him in the makeshift clinic. "Why?" she asked simply. He glared at first, then crumbled. "Grady said we'd be rich. Said you were keeping wealth from real Americans. Giving it to—" He couldn't finish. Shame finally overcoming hate. "I'm going to offer you the same choice I offered Billy," she said quietly. "Prison or apprenticeship. You can learn a trade, earn honest money, become part of this community. Or you can keep hating until it eats you hollow. Choose." The boy Samuel Harding stared at her. "Why would you trust me?" "I don't. Trust is earned, but everyone deserves a chance to earn it." 2 days later, he showed up at the forge, arm still in a sling but determination in his eyes. Billy eyed him warily, but Eliza paired them together. "You'll learn from each other," she said firmly. "Or you'll both be sweeping floors until you do." The town held a memorial for the dead, including old Ben, who'd fallen in the raid. And, surprisingly, Tom Grady himself. Reverend Morrison spoke about redemption and waste, about lives that could have been different with different choices. "We bury the past today," he said. "Let us build a better future." That evening, as Eliza and Gideon worked to repair the forge, Marshal Crawford stopped by. His investigation had spread, uncovering a network of corruption throughout the territory. "You've done more than defend a building," he told them. "You've shown people that standing together works, that justice isn't just for the powerful." There are towns all over the territory taking inspiration from Abalone Gulch. "We just did what needed doing," Eliza protested. "Exactly, and that's what's revolutionary." He tipped his hat. "Keep that forge burning. Miss Hart, it's lighting more than iron." As summer deepened, the forge expanded. With Billy and Samuel as apprentices, Eliza could take on more work. The town grew too, as word spread of a place where skill mattered more than skin color, where women could own businesses, where community meant something. Gideon's water project came to fruition, a system of channels and retention ponds that drought-proofed the region. The design incorporated ideas from the Mexican vaqueros, the Chinese farmers, and Eliza's own engineering improvements. Water flowed free to all, managed by a community board rather than private interests. "We're building something new here," Gideon said one evening, watching the sun set over their thriving town. "Not just prosperity, but a different way of living." "Together," Eliza agreed, her hand finding his. "Equal partners, like we promised." The forge bell rang, calling the apprentices to evening lessons. She'd started teaching literacy along with smithing, knowing that true independence required both. As she watched Billy help Samuel with his letters, former enemies, now brothers in craft, she felt her father's presence like a warm wind.
"You did it, Papa,"
she whispered.
"We did it."
The stars emerged one by one, as they always had. But tonight they seemed to shine on something worth their light. A community forged in fire, tempered by trials, and strong enough to face whatever came next. The Hart Forge stood at its center, no longer just a building, but a symbol of what people could accomplish when they stopped fighting each other and started fighting together for something better. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The railroad was coming, bringing change both good and bad. There would be more conflicts, more tests. But tonight, Eliza Hart Vale stood in her forge, surrounded by friends who'd become family, beside a partner who strengthened rather than diminished her, and knew that whatever came, they were ready. The hammer rang on steel, shaping tomorrow one strike at a time, and in that sound was a promise that Heart's Forge would stand, would serve, would shelter all who needed it. The blacksmith's daughter had become the heart of something larger than she'd ever dreamed, and found that in giving herself to community, she'd lost nothing and gained everything. Fire had tried to destroy them. Instead, it had only made them stronger. That was the way of the forge and the way of the people who'd made it their own. The harvest festival transformed Abalone Gulch into a fairyland of lanterns and music. Chinese paper dragons danced alongside Mexican mariachi bands, while freedmen from the South shared their spirituals with German settlers' drinking songs. The air smelled of roasting meat, fresh bread, and the underlying sweetness of Mrs. Chen's mooncakes. Eliza stood before Heart's Forge, now bearing a new sign, Hart and Company Forge and Waterworks. The company included not just the community shareholders, but her growing crew of apprentices and the water management team Gideon had assembled. "Never thought I'd see the day," Marcus Freeman said, resplendent in his sheriff's uniform, the star polished bright. "This town coming together like family." "Family fights sometimes," Eliza reminded him, watching Samuel Harding help Tommy Chen string more lanterns. The former Grady gang member had become one of her most dedicated apprentices. His shame transformed into determination to prove himself worthy of the second chance. "True enough, but they also stand together when it counts." Marcus nodded toward the judge's booth, where Patricia Thornton was mediating a pie-eating contest with grave judicial dignity. "Speaking of which, Judge Thornton asked me to give you this." He handed her an official-looking envelope. Inside was something that made her hands tremble. A territorial commission appointing her as official inspector of trades and apprenticeships, with authority to certify smiths throughout the region. "They want you to establish standards, create proper apprentice programs," Marcus explained. "Spread what you've built here to other towns." I don't know what to say." "Say yes." Gideon appeared at her elbow, having apparently already known about this. "You've earned it. Time to share that knowledge wider." Before she could respond, the festivities were interrupted by the arrival of a lone rider, Dusty. Exhausted, his horse lathered with sweat, he half fell from the saddle, gasping out his message. "Railroad camp. Attacked. Workers trapped in Skeleton Canyon. They need help." The music stopped. The railroad had been approaching for months, bringing both opportunity and concern. The workers, mostly Irish and Chinese immigrants, had faced hostility from those who saw the Iron Road as a threat to their way of life. "How many attackers?" Marcus demanded, already calculating. "Dozen, maybe more. Got 'em pinned in a box canyon. They'll starve 'em out or burn 'em out unless we help," Eliza finished. She turned to the crowd. "I know some of you have concerns about the railroad. Change is frightening. But those are working men trapped out there, trying to earn honest wages. We don't abandon folks in need." "The railroad brings competition," someone called out. "Might hurt local businesses." "Might," she agreed. "Also might bring new customers, new opportunities. But that's tomorrow's problem. Today's problem is people in danger. Who's with me?" The response was immediate. Within an hour, a rescue party had formed a mix of townspeople, vaqueros, and even some reformed outlaws who knew the canyon country. Eliza supervised the loading of supplies, including some special items from her forge. "You're not going," Gideon said firmly. "That canyon's perfect for ambush." "Which is why they need these." She held up one of her modified shields, portable and light but strong enough to stop bullets. "And someone who knows how to use them. We're partners. Remember in everything." He sighed, recognizing the futility of argument. "Then we go together, as always." They rode hard through the night, guided by the railroad worker who'd escaped. The canyon appeared at dawn, a narrow slash in the red rocks, smoke rising from its depths. The attackers had the high ground, firing down at makeshift barricades where the railroad crew huddled. "We'll never dig them out from those positions," Ramon observed grimly. "We don't need to," Eliza said, studying the terrain with a Smith's eye for structural weakness. "Billy, Samuel, see that overhang, what happens to rock when it's heated then rapidly cooled?" Understanding dawned in their eyes. "It cracks," Billy said. "Exactly. Get me those oil cans and water barrels." What followed was a demonstration of applied engineering that would become legend. Using improvised catapults, basically large slings made from wagon canvas, they launched containers of oil at the overhang, followed by flaming arrows. As the rock heated, they followed with water bombs. The thermal shock cracked the stone, sending tons of rock sliding down, cutting off the attackers' escape route and forcing them from their positions. In the confusion, the rescue party struck. The shields Eliza had created proved their worth, allowing the rescuers to advance under covering fire. The battle was brief but fierce. When the dust settled, the attackers, mostly hired thugs and malcontents, were captured or scattered. The railroad workers emerged from their sanctuary, many wounded, all exhausted. Their foreman, a grizzled Irishman named O'Brien, gripped Eliza's hand with tears in his eyes. "Thought we were done for. Why'd you risk it for us? We're strangers, competitors even." "No one's a stranger who needs help," she replied. "And competition doesn't mean enemies. We can grow together or die apart." Among the workers was a young Chinese engineer named Wei Chen, cousin to the Abalone Gulch Chens. His eyes shone with professional interest as he examined the thermal shock technique. "Brilliant application of expansion principles," he said. "I studied at the Missionary College in Canton Engineering and Metallurgy. This technique could help with tunnel construction." "Then maybe we should talk," Eliza said thoughtfully. "The railroad needs good steel, proper tools. Hart's Forge could supply them if we can come to fair terms." O'Brien laughed, sudden and relieved. "You're talking business while the gunsmoke's still clearing, lady. You're something else." "I'm a blacksmith," she corrected with a smile. "We're practical people." The ride back to town became a strange procession. Rescued workers, captive attackers, and townspeople united by shared danger. Around the campfire that night, stories were exchanged, bonds formed. The railroad men spoke of families left behind, dreams of bringing them west when the rails were complete. The townspeople shared their own tales of building something from nothing. "Maybe," suggested Wei Chen thoughtfully, "the railroad doesn't have to be separate from the town. What if the maintenance yard was located in Abalone Gulch? Steady work for locals, business for merchants, and the railroad gets a supportive community instead of a hostile one." Eyes lit up around the fire as possibilities bloomed. Gideon and O'Brien began sketching plans in the dirt. Marcus Freeman discussed security arrangements. Even the captured attackers listened, perhaps seeing a future beyond violence for hire. "You did this," Gideon told Eliza quietly as they watched connections form. "Not the rescue, though, that was magnificent. But this, teaching people to see opportunities instead of threats." "We did this," she corrected. "All of us. You just lead by example. Show people what's possible when we work together." He pulled her close, and she let him, no longer concerned about showing vulnerability. "That territorial appointment, you'll take it?" "If the town agrees, I won't abandon what we've built here." "You won't have to. Billy and Samuel are nearly ready to work independently. You could travel, teach, build networks of smiths and craftspeople, spread the Abalone Gulch model across the territory." She considered it, the girl who'd once wanted nothing more than to be left alone to her forge, now being asked to shape an entire profession. It's a big responsibility. "You're ready for it. We're ready for it." Back in town, the festival resumed with new energy. The railroad workers were welcomed as heroes, their story spreading quickly. Within days, a delegation from the railroad company arrived to negotiate. They found Eliza in her forge, demonstrating advanced techniques to a mixed class of apprentices that now included Wei Chen. "Miss Hart, The lead negotiator began. "We're prepared to offer, Mrs. Vale for this meeting," she interrupted calmly. "Though I remain Miss Hart for Forge business. And before you offer, understand this: any deal includes fair wages for all workers. Regardless of origin, the maintenance yard gets built here with local hiring preferences, and the forge remains independent, will supply quality at fair prices. But we won't be owned." The negotiator blinked at her directness. "Those are steep terms. Those are partnership terms. You can have suppliers and a hostile population, or you can have partners and a supportive community. Choose." They chose partnership. The celebration that night rivaled the original festival, in the forge yard, under stars and lanterns. Eliza found herself swept into dance after dance. Irish jigs merged with Mexican waltzes. Chinese dragon dances wound between square dance sets. The forge bell rang not in alarm, but in joy. "Look what you've built," Patricia Thornton said, joining Eliza during a break. "A year ago, this was a dying town with rigid divisions. Now it's chaos." Eliza laughed, watching Billy try to teach Samuel a German polka while Wei Chen provided accordion music. "Beautiful chaos, the kind that creates rather than destroys." The judge raised her glass. "To the forge that became a hearth." Later, as the party wound down, Eliza and Gideon walked through their town. The forge stood solid and welcoming, light spilling from its windows where apprentices still worked, learning to shape more than metal. The new water channels gleamed in the moonlight. Gardens flourished where dust had ruled. "No regrets?" Gideon asked. "About giving up your isolation?" She considered, remembering the woman she'd been fierce, alone, proud of needing no one. That woman still lived in her, but tempered now by something stronger than solitary pride. "How can I regret becoming more than I was?" She gestured at the scene, their community, their achievement. "I thought strength meant standing alone. Now I know it means standing for something, with others who share your values. And standing with someone who loves you," he added softly. "That too." She turned in his arms, no longer resisting the pull between them. "Partners in all things, Mr. Vale." "All things, Miss Hart." They kissed under the stars while music drifted on the night air, and their town celebrated the bridges they'd built, not just of iron and steel, but of understanding and common cause. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as the railroad arrived and the world expanded. But tonight, in this moment, they had everything they'd fought for: community, purpose, and love that strengthened rather than diminished. The blacksmith's daughter had resisted many things: charity, connection, trust, love. But in letting down her walls, she'd found not weakness but a different kind of strength. The kind that builds rather than just endures. The kind that transforms a dying town into a thriving community. The kind that turns a solitary forge into a beacon of hope. And as the last lantern flickered out and the town settled into peaceful sleep, Eliza Hart Vale stood with her husband, her apprentices, her chosen family, and knew that every blow of her hammer had been shaping this moment. The girl who'd wanted only to be left alone had become the heart of something larger, and in that becoming, had found her true strength at last. Years flowed like water through the channels they'd built, carving new paths while honoring the old. The railroad had brought change as profound as any storm steel rail stretching across the prairie like silver rivers, connecting Abalone Gulch to a wider world. Where once stood a handful of wooden buildings now spread a proper town, with brick storefronts and even a 2-story hotel. Eliza stood on the hill overlooking it all, her hair now streaked with premature silver from the forge's heat and life's trials. Beside her, Gideon studied survey maps for the latest water project, a reservoir that would ensure the town's survival through any drought. "Remember when you wouldn't take a barrel of water from me?" he asked, amused by the memory. "I was a fool," she admitted easily. "Proud and stubborn and magnificent," he finished. Still are, just learn to be magnificent with others instead of despite them. Below them, the forge complex had grown into a proper industrial works. The original building remained at its heart, but now workshops spread around it like petals on a desert flower. Billy Grimes had his own section, specializing in decorative ironwork that graced buildings from Denver to San Francisco. Samuel Harding ran the tool manufactory, creating implements that bore the heart stamp of quality. In Mrs. Vale, a young voice called. Eliza turned to see her newest apprentice, Maria Santos, the first girl to formally join the program. Behind her tagged a gaggle of other students, boys and girls of every background imaginable.
Miss Hart during working hours,
Eliza corrected gently.
What is it, Maria?
We finished the gate for the school. Want to see? They followed the excited youngsters down to where an ornate iron gate stood ready for installation. It was beautiful work combining Spanish flourishes, Chinese symbols for wisdom, African patterns shared by Marcus Freeman's wife, and native designs contributed by the Apache trader who now ran a shop in town. At its center, worked in flowing script, knowledge opens all doors. It's perfect, Eliza said, meaning it. You've all learned the most important lesson: strength comes from weaving different traditions together. Wei Chen approached, now chief engineer for the regional railroad. The afternoon train brought visitors for you, from the Territorial Commission. The delegation waiting at the forge was larger than expected, not just officials, but journalists, photographers, even a representative from an Eastern Industrial College. They'd come to see the Abalone Gulch miracle, as newspapers had dubbed it. Mrs. Vale. The lead commissioner began. Your apprenticeship program has become a model for the entire territory. We're here to discuss expanding it nationally. Then you'll need to speak with all of us, Eliza said, gesturing to her assembled partners. This wasn't built by one person. It's a community effort. What followed was a tour that showcased not just the forge, but the entire town's transformation. The water system that Gideon had designed with input from indigenous knowledge and Chinese irrigation techniques. The school where children of all backgrounds learned together. The courthouse where Judge Thornton dispensed justice without regard to race or status. The cooperative market where farmers and crafters sold goods on equal terms. This shouldn't work, one journalist muttered, scribbling notes. All these different people, these radical ideas. Why shouldn't it work? Maria Santos demanded with the fearlessness of youth. My papa came from Mexico, my mama from the Comanche. I learned smithing from Miss Hart, letters from Mrs. Chen, and arithmetic from Mr. Freeman. We're stronger for our differences. The photographer insisted on a group portrait at the forge, as they assembled workers, apprentices, town leaders, family. Eliza found herself at the center, not by design but by natural gravitation. Gideon stood behind her, one hand resting lightly on her shoulder. Around them gathered the tapestry of lives they'd helped weave together. Hold still now, the photographer commanded, disappearing under his black cloth. In that frozen moment, Eliza thought she felt her father's presence, warm as forge fire. Caleb Hart had planted seeds he'd never see bloom, but here was his harvest, a community that judged by skill and character rather than origin. A place where his daughter could be both blacksmith and lady, powerful and partnered. The flash powder exploded in white light, capturing them all. Later, as shadows lengthened and the delegation prepared to leave, promises were made. Funding for more apprenticeship programs, support for similar community initiatives across the West, recognition that the Abalone Gulch model could reshape American industry. You've started something that can't be stopped, the commissioner told Eliza privately. There will be resistance. People who profit from division won't appreciate what you've built. They've been resisting since the beginning, she replied. We're still here. That evening, the original forge hosted a smaller gathering, just the core group who'd been there from the start. They shared memories around the glowing coals, voices mixing with the ring of hammer on steel as Maria practiced her technique. "Never thought I'd live to see it," Marcus Freeman said quietly. "A place where my children can dream as big as anyone's, where skill matters more than skin, where a widow can run a business without shame. Mrs., Chen added, where my son reads law books instead of just washing clothes. Where a man can find redemption." Samuel Harding contributed, his scarred hand steady now on his work. "Where past mistakes don't define your future." "Where love doesn't require surrender," Eliza said, finding Gideon's hand. "Where partnership means multiplication, not division." A coyote howled in the distance, that wild sound that had once seemed so lonely to a young woman working alone in the night. Now she heard it differently, a voice in the larger chorus, part of the vast conversation between all living things under the western stars. "What now?" Billy asked. "We've built the town, established the programs, proved it works. What's next?" Eliza smiled, thinking of the letters piling up on her desk, requests for help from other communities, invitations to speak at colleges, proposals for new innovations. Now we teach others. Now we make sure this doesn't end with us. "The railroad connects us to the whole country," Wei Chen observed. "Ideas can travel those rails as easily as goods." "Then let them travel," Gideon said. "Let every town that wants to can learn what we've learned, that diversity is strength, that justice builds prosperity, that a blacksmith's daughter can reshape the world with a hammer and a dream." Patricia Thornton finished, raising her glass. "To Eliza Hart Vale, who resisted everything except the call to make things better." "To all of us," Eliza corrected, raising her own glass. "To the forge that became a family." They drank and talked and planned until the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. But when the others had gone home, Eliza remained in the forge with Gideon, watching the coals pulse like a heart. "Any regrets?" he asked, an echo of a question from years before. She considered the girl she'd been, fierce and alone behind her walls, the woman she'd become, still fierce but surrounded by chosen family. The journey between, marked by loss and triumph, fear and love. "How can I regret the fire that forged me?" She leaned into his warmth. "Every blow shaped something necessary, even the pain." "Especially the pain," he agreed. "It taught us what we were fighting for." Outside, Abalone Gulch slept peaceful under star-drunk skies. The railroad carried dreams east and west. The water flowed free to all who thirsted. The forge stood ready for tomorrow's work. And somewhere in the cemetery, Caleb Hart rested knowing his daughter had become more than either of them had dared imagine. The blacksmith's daughter resisted temptation until the rich cowboy pulled her close, Eliza murmured, remembering that moment in the storm that had changed everything. But it was never about temptation, was it? It was about trust, about choosing connection over isolation, about finding strength in surrender. Gideon agreed. The right kind of surrender, not to ownership, but to partnership. She turned in his arms, this man who'd seen her strength and never tried to diminish it, who'd offered partnership when he could have demanded submission, who'd helped her build something neither could have achieved alone. "Thank you," she said simply, "for seeing me, for waiting until I could see myself." "Thank you," he replied, "for being worth the wait." They stood together in the forge that had witnessed so much of father's patient teaching, a daughter's stubborn pride, a community's slow birth, a love that transformed rather than constrained. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to shape the world one strike at a time. But tonight, in this moment between what was and what would be, they had everything each other, their community, their purpose. The girl who'd wanted only to be left alone had become a beacon for those seeking belonging. The forge that had stood solitary now anchored a vision of what America could become. The hammer rested quiet on the anvil, but its work continued in every life touched, every prejudice overcome, every hand extended across old divisions. This was the true craft, not just shaping metal but forging bonds that could bear any weight, weather any storm. And in the vast western night, under stars that had watched countless dreams die and be reborn, Abalone Gulch stood as proof that sometimes the strongest thing isn't standing alone. It's choosing to stand together, to build rather than simply endure, to love rather than simply survive. The blacksmith's daughter had found her true strength at last, and in finding it, had helped a whole town, maybe a whole territory, find theirs as well. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, courage, and community in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps working at your own craft? Please share your thoughts in the comments below and let me know what touched your heart in Eliza and Gideon's journey. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel for more authentic stories of the American frontier, where love blooms as fierce and wild as the landscape itself. Your support helps keep these tales alive for fellow dreamers and romantics around the world. Until next time, partners.